Hello, everyone, and welcome to Third Place Books in Seward Park. My name is Andrea. I am a bookseller here, and tonight I am thrilled to welcome you all for a conversation about the Shelf Life Community's Story Project's new book, Limitless, Stories from the Neighborhood That Shaped Seattle. Third Place Books loves hosting community events, and we are so thrilled to close out our 2025 season with this oral history of Seattle Central District. To find out more about our 2026 events, including upcoming readings with authors such as Shannon McGuire, David Gooderson, and George Saunders, please visit our website at thirdplacebooks.com.
I'm hoping to leave most of this evening to the artists who are here and also some people who have stories in the book, but I thought I would provide a little bit of background on how the book came to be. So I'll do that first. I'm the founder of a project called the Shelf Life Community Story Project, which started in 2015, I think, when I learned that the Red Apple at 23rd and Jackson was going to be closed and torn down, and it felt like a community anchor masquerading as a grocery store, and so it felt important to record the stories of the people who worked there and the people who shopped there. So we finagled our way into using the empty storefront next door to the Red Apple, which used to be a lot of things, but the most recent thing it had been was a Subway, so it defined the Shelf Life color palette a little bit. But it was like right next door, shared a wall with the Red Apple, and we set up a little oral history recording studio in the back, and had some artists come in and do some work. This is a picture of Henry Luke came in and did some small sort of mural-ish panels based on people that we were interviewing and stories that they told. So he's working there on a mural of Hayward Evans, and then to the right is one that he created of Leon Carter and his story about KYAC. And then we did a bunch of workshops teaching people how to record audio and how to conduct interviews. And we did our best to make the most of the color, the walls, and with images and quotes from the interviews that we had conducted. And lots of people were involved in the project, and they're all mentioned in the book, but people who were conducting interviews were myself, Rachel Kessler, Henry Luke, Chieko Phillips, Leilani Lewis, Maiwa Aina, Dominique Meeks, Lulu Carpenter, Luvetra Miles, and Sarah Post all did the interviews. And we did about 75 interviews. And we had a really great community forum party where people we had interviewed came and shared some stories in person. And just had an opportunity to sort of meet each other and listen to some stories. It was an excellent party in the old Subway. We had some Black Panthers who hung out there. Mike Tagawa and Mark Cook were both interviewed at the Shelf Life space and came back for the party. And in this time, the project had evolved to be a neighborhood oral history project. So it started out as a grocery store oral history project, but then we sort of literally and figuratively followed people out of the store and into the neighborhood. And so when inevitably the Red Apple was closed and torn down, the next step was to create a podcast, and we made a 10-episode podcast out of the stories that had been recorded, and the podcast team was Maiwa Aina and Dominique Meeks, and Bubba Jones did the original music, and it's actually it is an excellent podcast, honestly. It's really good for especially, I think, people who are new to Seattle and new to the Central District especially, or if you're nostalgic, it's good for that too. There were so many people who worked on this project that you have to check the book for that list of names. But I do want to read the last paragraph in the intro to the book. One person who never saw the inside of the shelf life space, but who nevertheless had a hand in shaping its vision, is Rahwa Habti. Rahwa and her restaurant Hidmo are in the DNA of shelf life. Hidmo was the first place in this city where I witnessed the use of art and stories to build collective power. I don't think any of this would have happened were it not for those lazy afternoons and crowded, delicious nights of good food, good music, and good people on the corner of 20th and Jackson. So, thank you, Rahwa. Pretty soon I'm going to hand it over to the artists. The process for creating art for this book was that there were a bunch of stories that the artists could choose from, and then the instructions were read the stories and whatever art comes out can go in the book, basically, right? So it wasn't like any sort of specific illustration guidelines. It was just artists who have roots in the Central District creating the art that they felt inspired to create by the stories that they had chosen. And those artists are Inye Wakoma. This is an artwork he created for the intro to the Community Voice chapter, which is really mostly about KYAC radio. Erin created this one to accompany Michael Fox's story about some of the work of Tyree Scott. Damon created this work to accompany one of Al Doggett's stories. Kai Moscow Jackson, this is a story that he created to accompany Steve Sneed's story about school boycotts and busing. Ramson Bustilio created this one to accompany a story that Inye Wakoma told about growing up surrounded by art. Bonnie Hopper created this one to accompany a story by Lottie Cross about her experience leaving her family's sharecropping situation and coming by herself to Seattle on the train. And Jite Agbo did this piece to go with Hayward Evans's story about Mardi Gras being sort of the precursor to Seafair, and also talking about the Black Community Festival. So even though, people do this because they're supposed to, I do have to say that without For Culture and the Office of Arts and Culture, this book would not have happened. For Culture was the very first believer in shelf life. We got our first For Culture grant before we even had the old subway space, and on through the podcast, and the first grant for the book also came from King County For Culture. And then the Office of Arts and Culture, their Hope Corps grant, the first year that they were doing a Hope Corps program, which was a granting program to put artists back to work specifically, allowed us to pay a story editor to work with me for a whole year on selecting the stories, and then to pay 7 artists $9,000 each to create work to go with the stories, and to pay for the printing. So without that, none of this would have happened. And then Chin Music took a chance. I just got introduced by Bruce by a mutual friend, and he said, let's give it a shot. So that's how the book came to be, and that's enough talking for me. So this is another work that Damon created, and I was hoping that you could just talk a little bit about your experience working with stories told by people you know, including family members, and also just your experience working with these stories. If you want to use that mic, it's probably closer, but yeah, just talk a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah. I'm good. I hadn't I hadn't had much experience in my career of art illustrating stories. So this was kind of my first time doing a project like this. But what made it tough was, first of all, going through all the stories, because I'm from the Central District, born and raised, and a lot of the stories I hadn't heard or didn't know the background to the elders or the legacy members of the Central District. I didn't know their stories or their origin stories, so a lot of them I heard. So when I went through and picked some that I felt like I could tell, I wanted to make sure I got my Uncle Steve and a couple of other people. I was really kind of like stuck because they're such powerful stories, and I wanted to make sure that I honor them. And also stay within budget, because I probably could have worked on them forever. But that was kind of the process for me, picking the stories and then having a chance to illustrate these stories. So I do have an art style, so I wanted to make sure I applied it, but I also wanted to make sure that I represented them a lot. So my uncle, when I was young, I do remember him playing the drums. So that was the first and foremost thing that was going to be in the middle of the picture. And then him and all of his work he did in the community for Langston Hughes. So make sure I had those pictures in the book as well. And interestingly, I didn't want to redraw the pictures. I wanted to keep the history there because I think that's important, the photos. And I thought it was kind of interesting that the rest of the artists too kind of kept the collage style and honored the pictures as well. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. Yeah.
And so then this is one of the artworks that Erin Shigaki created to accompany a story that Phyllis Yasutake, who's also here, will be up in a bit.
Why are you hiding over there, Phyllis?
So yeah, I'm also sort of same question, like with your roots in the neighborhood, and what was it like to work with stories from a place that you're rooted in?
Yeah, to be completely transparent, I grew up on Queen Anne Hill, but then, like, everything that my family did was in the South End, in the Central District. Like, I'm not really sure why my parents bought that house in the 60s. But then, like, we did basketball in the South End and church. Like, my family, my spiritual home and sort of the place that I think about to give me grounding is my grandmother's house that was on King Street and 16th, like right up from the Japanese language school and the church there. It was recently finally turned into condos. But, that's the neighborhood where we just did our business, like all of our socializing. Nobody talked to us on Queen Anne anyway for like a decade or something. So that's where I gained my strength, and that's where, it's like it's really important to me because it was really special that my family was able to return there after the war, A lot of people lost their homes and businesses due to the mass incarceration, and my grandparents were able to hold on to their house, and therefore I was also able to grow up in that house along with, my dad and his siblings before us. So as soon as I went into public art, I was telling the stories of this neighborhood that brought me up and the way that different groups of folks have always made really rich lives there, and are holding on to those stories really strongly. And so this was the first one I did, and it just happened to have like a little bit of a funny tale to it, about the man at the
Phyllis is going to tell a story.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no
Good.
Spoilers.
Okay. So so I knew that I wanted to like use photographs because that's what I do in my public artwork. I use historic photographs, and then I do not have an illustration style like Damon does, so I kind of had to figure that out, but I wanted to give kind of a soft look to contrast with the photographs.
Thank you. Phyllis, do you want to come up? So this is Phyllis Yasutake, who was going to be here with was going to be here with her father Cecil, who's not feeling well, but Phyllis came through, and I have to say that of all the interviews we did at Shelf Life, that the interview I conducted with Phyllis and her father Cecil together was so special and amazing, and their dynamic and the stories that they told, like that could have been a book, like the Phyllis and Cecil story. So it was hard to choose, and there's several stories in the book that were told in that interview about everything from education to Black Panthers to dentures. So for people who don't know who Mr. Gideon was, who never heard of Gideon's Pharmacy, who've never heard this story, would you be willing to tell the story? Okay. You want a mic?
Mr. Gideon was a pharmacist. He actually made the pharmaceuticals that he sold in his, and he had a soda fountain shop on Madison, right next door to Dr. Joyner's office. And my aunt worked for Dr. Joyner, Clara Taylor. Miss Taylor worked for Dr. Joyner, and his daughter was my best friend, Bobby. So I would be at Auntie's office, at the office with her, waiting to go home with her and spend the weekend. And I really, really, really wanted a banana split. Ice cream, the banana, the nuts sprinkled on top, the chocolate syrup, and that blessed maraschino cherry. I really liked that cherry. But all I had was 10 cents, and that meant all I could have was a 6-cent soda. And I was devastated. And Auntie Clara said I could go down and get it, and I didn't dare ask her for money or Dr. Joyner, who they all would have given it to me, but my mother would have ripped me to pieces. You don't ask. If you don't have it, you don't need it. And so I had 10 cents for a 6-cent soda, and I moped and pouted my way down to the drugstore, and I walked in. And when I walked in, Mr. Gideon said, "I'll give you whatever you want. You just don't tell anybody what you saw today." And I was like, I looked around, I couldn't see anything unusual. And I was like, "Oh, I want a banana split with the chocolate syrup, maraschino cherry, nuts, and you know." And so he made it up huge, beautiful. And I was eating it so fast because I thought he was going to question me on what it was I wasn't supposed to tell. And I wanted to get as much of it eaten before I told him I didn't know. And finally he says to me, "If you ever tell anybody you saw me without my teeth." I didn't know he didn't have his teeth in. I didn't know teeth came out, except, you know, when they pull them when you're a kid. So, and he still didn't look like he didn't have his teeth, so, but I didn't care. I had the banana split. You see how the universe works for you? And I was so happy, and now I can tell the story because he's passed away, because I promised never to tell it, but now it's okay. He's gone, his wife is gone, and I'm free to share the story. That's why when I saw that picture, I said, "Oh, wow, did I tell that story?" I knew that was what that picture meant.
But I have another question for you. So I have another question for Phyllis, and it comes out of sort of the origins of the name of the book. So the word limitless came from an interview we did with Marie Cadet, who said that her childhood in the Central District felt limitless, that there was just so much possibility and so much care that it felt like they could go anywhere and do anything as children in that space. and but also this idea that all of the processes that occurred in the Central District in response to all of the obstacles, not just redlining, but all of the discrimination occurring there, and then everything that people brought with them when they arrived in whichever decade and found that the Central District was where they had to be, but also the Central District was where people were waiting for them as a landing pad. That all of those processes of innovation and creativity and resistance and mutual aid shaped the entire city, shaped the arts and culture scene in the city, it shaped policy, it shaped transportation. So that's sort of the idea, is that all of those processes, some of which are represented in the stories in this book, really did shape the entire city, and that learning from them could help us to do a better job of shaping the city in the future. But you, Phyllis, had talked about when you were a kid in the neighborhood, that everything was there. That you had said the doctor's office, Madrona movie theater. You said you didn't go downtown, only fast, misbehaved children went downtown. Yeah, you said there were black cleaners, black restaurants, black hair shops, etc. So I wonder if you could just talk a little, maybe elaborate a little bit on that feeling of it being, everything being there.
Yes, we had Mr. God, I can't even think of people's names anymore. Joe and John. I can't think of their last name. Their dad had a shoe shop up on 34th. And the other gentleman, I can't think of his name. And I grew up with him in Mount Zion. And he had a gas station and car repair shop. No, 34th. It was, no, this was back in the 50s. We moved in that house in 1954. I can't think of his name. He owned it. It was on like 34th and Pine on the right-hand side of the street. And he and another member of Mount Zion, the two men, worked that gas station garage together. There was one across. There was a garage across the street from them. And that man had twin sons that I went to school with at Franklin. And I can't remember anybody's name, for God's sake. But everything was there. The pharmacist, the doctor's office, anything you needed was in our community. And you may not know everybody, but you knew all the family names, because the black community was very small. And so we all knew each other, and everybody knew us. And I would tell Mother, they don't know me. She said, "You're Yvonne Beatty's daughter." I said, "But she didn't know who I was." Mother said, "That's all she needs to know, is you are Yvonne Beatty's daughter." And I was a bit of a mischief person. I liked to climb trees, cherry trees, apple trees, plum trees, pear trees. If there was a tree, I climbed it and rated it. And I didn't, I was in and out. And I was fortunate to never break my neck or kill myself. And but then they would call my mother. But we had the party line, and my job was to get home before they could get through the party line and confess my sins, so that when they called, Mother looked good. "Oh, she told me she was in your yard, and I'm getting it straight, and she will not do that again." And so she looked good. But if the call came in before I got home, then I got whooped. But it never stopped me from climbing the trees in anybody's yard. I like climbing trees. So yeah, all the churches were pretty central, and we just had everything. We had hamburger places, we had soul food restaurants, we had little grocery stores. It was just, my children even now say they didn't realize that the black community wasn't as big as they thought it was, because they had so many activities that centered around black activities. African American churches and the piano lessons and the East Madison YMCA day camp. Everything was there. And so my daughter was telling me the other day, she said, Mom, you did such a good job. We didn't realize we were in the minority. And that's because my mom did a good job. She was Northwest Area Secretary of the NAACP. She was Seattle Secretary of the NAACP, and then she moved up to Northwest Area Secretary of the NAACP. And that's why I had to voluntarily racially transfer in 1963 when the program opened up. But before then, my aunt and uncle, Walt Hundley, and Felisa Hundley. If you went to McClure, you knew about the Hundley grip. Auntie, did you know her at McClure?
No, well, one of the Hundleys was my tennis coach at Franklin.
Oh, that was Evan.
Yeah.
Yes, my cousin.
Okay.
I lived with them and babysat their boys at night while they went to school. Uncle Walter was getting a master's and Auntie was getting her teaching certification. And so I had to go to Woodrow Wilson, and I was the only black student in the whole building, and it wasn't pleasant. And then my friends it was a junior high school, and my friends in the central area didn't see me anymore, so I didn't get invited to parties, and nobody called and asked me to do anything. And then over there, I was excluded because I was black, and it was a very lonely year. So when Mother said, you can pick what school you go to, Franklin. It was close to home. I knew other people going to Franklin. And I chose Franklin because I was not going out north to integrate anything ever again.
You want to tell the nail polish story? The Franklin nail polish algebra. You got kicked out?
It wasn't, it was because I was late. Daddy says nail polish, but it was because I was late. Franklin didn't have a large black population either, but they did have it. And I had an algebra teacher who was kicking everybody of color out of his class. And I had to catch a bus at 6:30 a.m. in the morning to get over to downtown and to Franklin to school. And the city buses, because there were they weren't transporting us. So I had that, and then when I got to school, I had band practice. We're marching outside, and then I had gym. And then I had to go 4 floors up to my locker, and then back down to the 3rd floor to algebra, and sometimes I was late. So the office gave me a pass, and when I came in with the pass, the man tore it up, said, now I have a reason to kick you out, you're out. And I said, but the office gave me an excuse, and he tore it up and said, I don't care, get out. So I went and called my dad. And my dad came down, and he said, he pulled the teacher out of the classroom, and he said, my brother-in-law's the chairman of CORE, my lawyer is the president of the NAACP. He said, we'll come sit in the classroom, or Phyllis will sit in the classroom. And the man tried to argue with him. Dad said, no, this is a yes or no, us or Phyllis. He said, I work for myself, and this is costing me money to be here. So he said, make up your mind. It's we come sit in that classroom, or Phyllis sits in that classroom. The guy gave in and let me sit in the classroom, but Daddy made me do homework every night. I didn't have homework every night. But I come home with that algebra book, and I had to bring it home every day, and every day he made me do homework that I didn't have to do. So Franklin was not when I would say my parents are coming, the secretary would tell the principal, Miss Beatty's here and some man. And I already told that they were my parents and they're married. She didn't believe they were married. So she would say, Miss Beatty's here and some man. They were married 70 plus years, just to be clear. 1 month short of 71, so yeah. But she always introduced him as Miss Beatty and some man.
Another thing I remember from that story was that you or your dad said that your dad was down at Franklin so often that some of your classmates asked him if he was a teacher there.
No,
if he was a student there. For some reason, he was there all the time.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. He worked for himself, so he was his own independent worker, so he had more leeway. Mother came a lot too, but Daddy, I would call him because he wouldn't negotiate. He just, this is it, and this is what it's going to be. You know, they fill out my program and list all my classes, and then when I get my program, I got 3 study halls. We don't, and foods, and you know, a cooking class and a sewing class, and they'd come down, that Miss Beatty and some man, and have to change my whole program again. And that Daddy was there a lot. He came in a lot. So everybody used to tease me, is your dad going to school here? Why is your dad here so much?
Oh my God, I love that. So I would like to leave some time for questions. Do we have time for questions? We're on. Because we're not doing like an official, as Andrea mentioned, we're not going to do an official book signing because the book is the product of, 75 people plus 7 artists. But if you want any of these people to sign your book, I'm sure they would be happy to when we sort of move things over there. But if people have questions for anyone up here, Phyllis or Damon or Erin, about the art process or the shelf life process or anything, now's the time. Unless you two have anything you want to add.
I don't know if I have a favorite, but there's a lot. I got a lot of the.
Repeat the question.
Oh. You wanted to know my fondest memory of growing up in the Central District? There's so many, but I think, again, back to my uncle, he gave me some opportunity to do some art. I was big into art since I was a kid, and he allowed me to create and draw some posters for some plays they were doing at Langston Hughes. So that was probably my first, project of that level, you know what I mean? And that was big for me, but I have so many. The Central District was everything. I got a lot of the tail end of like the Joe Spats and some of the rest, Burgers, Spates, and Helen's and all that, and then all the things that happened in the '90s and all the way up till now. So there's a lot of memories. So to be able to again to illustrate some of these stories is big. I did. Yeah.
With
Right with the.
the building?
Yeah. Yeah. How was I then? 13. Summer Youth Employment Program.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So again, my uncle handing out opportunities. I did the Summer Youth Employment Program. Sometimes I was packing school lunches, but this time they had an opportunity to paint a mural right there on 23rd in Union, right where Midtown Center is. Ended up turning into a liquor store and some other things. It was kind of an empty building at the time, so they allowed us to paint these murals on the side. And I think I have a picture of it. I think I ended up painting my grandmother. I think I put UW in the background, and I think it had like Seward Park going around, and I think I was all of like 13. That was probably my first mural, at 13. Yeah. Wow, that was, yeah.
The question was, what impact did reading the stories have on the artists?
Big question. It's okay. Well, I didn't know a lot of the stories either. There is still a little bit of, I think, separation, between the particular communities. So I knew the ones that came directly out of the Japanese American community probably, but I think having them sort of all at our fingertips and being given the opportunity to work on this project just continued to fire me up about doing this storytelling, about being really clearly based in the community and not only making art, but making art that educates about the things that need to happen in our communities, the things that need to change, that have always needed to change, the kinds of justice that needs to be served. And at this moment, when people of color are being taken out of our communities in the same way that they've always been cycled out and put into the carceral system, that's part of my art practice. So, I just feel really lucky to be part of this project.
Again, I think for me, I didn't know a lot of the stories, but I kind of knew some of the stories. So they filled in. I think one time my mom gave me some shirts and prints of Al Doggett's work. Right, and I was like, oh, this is cool. So to come back around and kind of know his intro stories and to be able to do something as honor was big. I didn't know my uncle's story. I didn't know how he got here. I didn't know Phyllis's story. Know that she knows my mom, and she telling me she remembers me when I was a baby. But I've been able to give back to my community artistically, but then I've also been able to take it farther outside the community and hopefully inspire people from my community to, pursue their passions of art. And then I also make sure that I put some of my community in everything I do that's out in the world. Like I told my mom, my plan is to try to go global with it. So if I can have the Central District on my back and Washington State and so on, that's going to be the mission for me. But yeah, some of the stories were very eye-opening. I remember Red Apple, it was a big corner store, but there was so many of those things for us throughout the Central District. So, definitely get this book and preserve these stories and let them live on. So, yeah.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I don't know how we're good for time. Okay, that the idea behind recording these stories was never just about preservation, like recording them and putting them away in an archive, although that is also important, but more about figuring out ways, how can these stories and these histories be useful to the community and to the neighborhood, and also how can they sort of shift the way the city thinks about change and about the future, and to use the stories to try to interrupt those narratives of erasure that come in with the gentrification and the displacement caused by it, and to sort of bring back the actual stories of the neighborhood to replace those narratives that have tried to replace that history. So there's preservation as part of it, but it's not the only piece. Anybody else have any closing statements? You want to say anything? Phil? You look like you got something to say, Phil.
Yeah, my parents met in 1942 in Bremerton. They came here through the war. My dad came here from Oklahoma as a machinist. He picked Washington because it was as far away from Oklahoma as he could find. And my mom came here through a program where they recruited young women to come and work in the shipyard in the offices, and she could type and do shorthand. And they lived in a dormitory. They were supervised and everything. And then they met there and got married. And they bought their home in Madrona in 1954. But before that, they were in High Point. And High Point was government, and that's when they left the shipyard and went to work for Boeing. And the High Point was for the war workers. It wasn't for low income. And so when they changed it to low income, they said anybody making X amount of dollars will pay market value. And my parents said, oh, no, we're moving. So everybody was there. Sam Smith was in that. Marion used to babysit us when Marion, Sam Smith's wife. Everybody lived there. And That's when they bought the home in Madrona in 1954. I was 6 when we bought that house. And it was a brick house. So I thought it was a castle. I still, in the back of my mind, that deep up in that attic are treasures. I'd read too many books. And so I just knew there was treasure up there. The only thing I found was a mouse. And then sleep in my room for weeks. But yeah, the Central area, it still makes me feel good. I knew I always felt safe. I always felt I could knock on any door and get help. Between my home and Mount Zion, I would walk up there. I walked to Meany for middle school, junior high. It was junior high then, and we walked. I lived on 31st between Pine and Olive, and that's where I grew up. And my sister walked to Garfield. I walked to Meany, and there was no fear. The East Madison YMCA. You see that stoplight right there on 23rd and Olive? The East Madison YMCA men put that stop sign there, that stoplight, because I got hit by a car crossing that street. Coming home from Meany, and I was crossing, and the first car stopped. It was me, Gigi Poe, and Lynn, I can't think of, we called her Beatrice Lynn, I can't think of her last name, but the three of us are crossing, and a car stopped, and when we got past him, this lady in a big Cadillac just came flying and hit all three of us. And Chipper Minnis was walking behind us. He ran into the Y. My mother worked at the Y and let her know I'd be injured. And Mother she said, okay, call this number and call this person and call this person. And Chipper stayed at the desk, and Mother came out to check on me. But first she assigned him to call Dr. Joyner and to call my father and call people. And after that, the East Madison Wise Men, it was an organization called the Wise Men, and they petitioned, fought, and my dad just raised holy hell. He said, kids cross the street every day coming to that Y. Why is there not a light there? There's a light there now. That's because those men fought to get that light. It was just home. Everybody knew everybody. Unfortunately, sometimes.
Better or worse.
Oh yeah. And Mother said everybody had the right to tell me what to do, adult-wise. That's why, even though I was little and skinny, I weighed 30 pounds in the 3rd grade. I weighed 89 pounds when I graduated from high school, and let me tell you, that ship has sailed. But I never let a kid boss me around. I knew they could beat me up, but they had to catch me first. And every day when my sister was in school with me, if anyone tried to get me, I just get smarty mouth and my sister's gonna beat you up. I read my report card the other day. Mother kept it where the teacher asked her to ask me to stop doing that. I was hoping somebody could beat her up because she was always beating me up, but she was tough. And once you know, Pamela Beatty is no roll over and take it person. She's tough. And so when she graduated, I just ran home from school every day, because people were always trying to bully me. They finally gave up because they couldn't intimidate me. And I didn't see any reason to just stand there and get beat to a pulp. Everybody outweighed me. They were bigger than me. So I just ran home. But they couldn't push me around in school.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your stories and your art, and all of you